welcome to my podcast called Innervation. Innervation was inspired by my previous podcast, Silence, where over the course of 2 years, I spoke every week with 100 women from science, technology, engineering, mathematics, or STEM. That's 100 women over the course of 2 years, and I kept all of these guests anonymous so that they could talk openly and honestly about their lives. And we discussed their experiences and what they've learned along their life journeys and their hopes and ideas for living fulfilling and contented lives. Because all of these women's identities were kept safe, the conversations on Silence were always so raw and transparent, and we didn't just talk about being women in STEM, but about everything. The topics that tended to come up were also the same topics that I discussed with my own friends and family, and I also discuss the same topics with my mentees, or people come up to me after talks that I've given in schools and colleges and ask me about these certain icky subjects which are difficult to talk about in groups. So I thought, rather than keep these topics closed and intimate, how about throwing them out into the world and letting everyone hear and engage in issues that are clearly important to many of us? So what I've done is sift through the episodes of Silence to bring you my favourite sound bites on these certain topics. And each week on Innervation, I'll be reflecting on the perspectives that came up from Silence that I feel are actually pearls of wisdom. And I found these sound bites provoking and inspiring and empowering, and I hope that they resonate with you too. This week is all about anxiety. Anxiety is such an interesting subject because I think many people think that having anxiety is a really, really bad thing. And it certainly feels awful and awkward and debilitating sometimes. But I often do remind myself that if it wasn't for anxiety, I probably wouldn't be motivated, and I probably wouldn't be driven, and I probably wouldn't get out of my comfort zone to try and change that anxiety. So I have, over the course of several years, tried to make anxiety my friend. And what I found actually is that other people have been quite judgmental of my anxiety, saying, God, you're so anxious. You know, you seem to be such an anxious person. Or you seem to be quite restless or irritable or discontent with something. And actually, rather than taking that criticism on board and going, yeah, I'm such a bad person, there must be something so wrong with me, I actually think, okay, yeah, maybe I am a bit anxious at the moment. What is it that my anxiety is trying to tell me? So I use my anxiety as a kind of signal that I need to turn inwards, look at what's bothering me, and try and change it or improve it or grow. So anxiety has been really useful of late for getting to know myself better and providing myself with an opportunity to actually be kind and loving to myself, really. So I'm going to kick off this podcast with a soundbite from episode 5 of Silence to try and get to the bottom of where anxiety for some of my women in STEM has actually originated from.
Hard work.
I think, unfortunately, that's just fear of failure. So I guess it's for me, it's this underlying anxiety of I was committed to this path because the end goal is what I want. And so the fear of failure, failure was not an option.
I so relate to that.
I must say that anxiety for me is very similar to this guest from episode 5, because for me, anxiety is this real fear of failing, a real fear of making mistakes, of not being perfect, of ultimately not being loved and accepted and validated by others. And I've had a real anxiety over that because I've gone through my life really wanting to be accepted and to belong to a group because, being in various minority groups, whether that's a woman in engineering where there are so few of us, or a brown person in a predominantly white country, or whatever the case may be, I've always had anxiety for not fitting in and for not being accepted. And, I've had to really sort of stop and ask myself where my own anxiety comes from. And I think lots of people have anxiety for lots of different reasons. And I don't think any other person could tell me why I have anxiety, because no one has lived my life, no one has my DNA, no one has had my experiences. So again, it's a topic for innovation, because it's really important to turn inwards and ask ourselves where our anxiety, our own personal anxiety, comes from. And yes, we may relate to other people's anxiety and really get it in the same way I really related to my guest from episode 5. But we don't necessarily need to have anxiety for all the same reasons. And one person's anxiety is not better than another person's anxiety, or more valid, or more excusable, or more understandable. I think having anxiety is a beautiful thing, and it's very personal to us, and we should treat it with compassion and kindness and really try and understand it so that we can soothe ourselves when we experience anxiety. My guest from episode 10 talks about where her anxiety comes from, and it's very different from my previous guest.
Is workplace culture is causing me a lot of anxiety. The need for being perfect and doing everything really, really well is causing a lot of stress. Those kinds of things.
I think it's really okay to sort of dig deep and, spend some time on ourselves, getting to know what makes us tick, what makes us anxious, what keeps us stimulated, what brings us joy. So little time is actually spent on ourselves and getting to know our own truths. And what I love about the last two guests is that they really do spend time sort of going inwards, getting self-reflective and finding out where that anxiety comes from. Because in having an awareness about our anxiety, we're one step closer to conquering it. And my guest from episode 78 has made those strides to conquering her anxiety. And she describes how she deals with her own.
I definitely do have those things. Most of the time, I have very strong self-belief and self-confidence, but I definitely have my wobbles. So I think being a perfectionist, so you mentioned earlier that people who study STEM subjects tend to be quite perfectionist, and I think having those personality traits, being a high achiever, there's a lot of anxiety that goes with that. And that's something that I definitely feel. I mean, there have been so many times where I've thought I'm doing terribly, or that I'm not doing quite enough, and I've been self-critical, to the point where it's been very much to the detriment of my mental health. But I've got a very good support network around me, and I always try to put things into perspective.
I love that empowered perspective of my guest from episode 78, because I think many people try to deny that they have anxiety or cover up that they have anxiety because they don't want to be seen as vulnerable or weak in any way. But the fact that she really owns her anxiety and says, yeah, it comes from perfectionism, and I do strive to have self-confidence and self-belief, but there are moments when I have my wobbles. It's such an empowered place to be. I really want to be there where I can say, yeah, I'm not feeling great today. I don't know, something about whatever's in my head that's just making me feel a bit anxious today, or making me feel a little bit low on the self-confidence scale, is really empowering, because there's this sense of this too shall pass, that it's not who you are, it's not what defines you, but it is this sense of being really in control of one's own mental health. And I love the fact that she throws in this idea of leaning on supportive people, because I think when we do meet up with other people and share our stories with other people, it really does help to put everything in perspective, because I think trying to deal with our anxiety by ourselves means that we can often be in a cave of our own misery, and we don't realize that outside of the cave is sunshine and opportunity and gratitude and all these positive things, because we're too sort of trapped in our own minds. And so I think it is really good to have a strong support network around us, people that really are kind and compassionate with us and who support us and understand us and who believe in us and basically love us until we can learn to love ourselves, and accept us until we can learn to accept ourselves. I think it's really crucial to have that around us, and not all of us are lucky enough to have that kind of support network. You know, I certainly growing up didn't really have that kind of support, because my parents were always pushing me to be the best versions of myself. And, you know, whilst that was really good to have that constant drive and motivation to be better, there were times when I actually wanted a shoulder to cry on and just go, I don't think I'm doing this very well. And to just have that passing moment. And so often I would turn to great friends and my sisters who would really be there to say, it's all right, you're just having a sort of blip on your confidence scale, but you're still awesome and you still have got this and you can still do this. And so, yeah, having a really strong support network, I think, is key. But also, as I am always pushing on this podcast of innovation, I think it's really important to just be with yourself and feel comfortable of just spending time with yourself and being alone. I think that is the most empowering thing of all. And as always, it's a balancing act between sort of spending time with yourself, spending time with others, and just really finding that sort of, I don't know, balance between all of those aspects of maintaining good mental health. And so you'll get to the point where my guest from episode 43 has got to, where you learn to live with that anxiety. You know, you learn where it comes from. You know that it's actually necessary for driving you forward and for keeping you in a state of growth and evolution. And you also know how to deal with your anxiety and not get weighed down by it. This from episode 43.
Did you?
I think that perfectionism has helped with my sense of perseverance and diligence. I think that being a perfectionist has meant that I don't tend to be okay with a halfway finished product, that I really want to see things through to the highest level that I can take them. So I think that's very helpful, but it has hurt me because I actually struggle with a lot of anxiety. And I think perfectionism has played into that in some ways. I don't tend to get very anxious about my work, but I do tend to get anxious about how people view me and whether I am being the best person I can be. Not the best scientist and not the best student, but I do get hung up sometimes on whether I'm being the best person I can be. So sometimes when I do something or say something to someone or have a petty conflict with a friend or with a classmate that I know is not nice or not right, it really sticks with me and it can really like cast a cloud on my day or on my week. So I have trouble letting things go sometimes. And I'm trying to work on that because you have to be able to release yourself of things in order to move forward and try new things. So that's something I'm working on.
So make anxiety your friend. It's there to teach you something more about yourself. It's there to increase the intimacy you have with your own existence. And don't see it as a foe, but actually see it as something that is guiding you to become a better version of yourself. Don't worry about what anybody else thinks about your anxiety. It's really honestly there to help you, in my opinion, and it's definitely been something I've learned to love about myself. Thank you so much for listening this week. Please do subscribe to this podcast and maybe even rate and review if you can. I'd love to have your feedback about this episode or any others that you've listened to, and maybe some suggestions for future topics for this show. It's all about self-discovery and evolution on Innervation, so if there are any issues which you feel are holding you back from living to your fullest potential, I'd love to delve into that by drawing upon the wisdom and experiences of my amazing guests from Silence. Be kind and loving to yourselves, and I wish you all a great week.